The snow was falling so hard that it erased footprints within minutes. The wind cut through layers of cloth like a blade. Engines would not start. Rifles jammed. Men woke up to find their boots frozen solid. And somewhere in that endless white silence outside Moscow in December 1941, the most powerful army in Europe began to realize something terrifying. They were no longer advancing. They were being hunted. This was the moment the Red Army struck back in the snow, and the myth of German invincibility began to collapse. If you enjoy powerful, real history told in a cinematic and easy-to-understand way, take 2 seconds right now to like this video and subscribe to History Plus. It helps the channel grow and allows us to bring you deeper stories that most people never hear about. Now let's step into the freezing winter of 1941. By the summer of 1941, Nazi Germany looked unstoppable. In just 2 years, Adolf Hitler had defeated Poland, crushed France, and forced much of Europe under his control. The German military used a fast and aggressive strategy known as Blitzkrieg, or lightning war. Tanks, aircraft, and infantry moved, together with speed and precision. Enemy armies collapsed before they could react. Many experts believed Germany had built the most effective military machine in the world. Then in June 1941, Hitler launched Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union. It was the largest invasion in human history. Over 3 million German and Axis soldiers crossed the border. Thousands of tanks rolled forward. Aircraft filled the skies. The goal was simple but ambitious: destroy the Soviet Union in a matter of months. At first, everything seemed to go according to plan. Soviet forces were caught off guard. Entire armies were surrounded and captured. Millions of Soviet soldiers were killed or taken prisoner in the first months. German forces moved hundreds of miles into Soviet territory. Cities like Smolensk and Kiev fell. The road to Moscow seemed open. German soldiers believed the war in the east would be finished before winter. Many officers confidently told their men they would be home by Christmas. Winter uniforms were not prioritized because leadership assumed they would not be needed. That decision would later prove deadly. But the Soviet Union was not like France or Poland. It was massive. Its land seemed endless. As German forces pushed deeper, their supply lines stretched longer and thinner. Fuel had to travel hundreds of miles. Food deliveries were delayed. Spare parts became scarce. Vehicles broke down on rough roads that turned into mud during the autumn rains. This muddy season, known as Rasputitsa, slowed the German advance dramatically. Still, German commanders believed victory was near. Moscow was the political and symbolic heart of the Soviet Union. If Moscow fell, many believed the Soviet government would collapse. So the German army launched Operation Typhoon in October 1941, a massive push toward the capital. At first, they made progress. Soviet defenses were hit hard. Panic spread in Moscow. Some government offices prepared to evacuate. Civilians dug trenches around the city. Factories worked day and night producing weapons. The situation was critical. But while German forces were exhausting themselves in continuous attacks, something important was happening behind the scenes. Soviet industry had been moved east, beyond the Ural Mountains. Entire factories were dismantled and transported thousands of miles away from German bombers. Production of tanks, artillery, and ammunition continued far from the front lines. The Soviet Union was not collapsing. It was reorganizing. Then the temperature began to drop. By late November and early December 1941, temperatures fell to -30 and even -40 degrees Fahrenheit in some areas. German equipment was not designed for this kind of cold. Engine oil thickened and froze. Batteries failed. Machine guns jammed. Soldiers wrapped rags around their boots for extra insulation, but it was not enough. Frostbite cases increased rapidly. Fingers turned white, then black. Toes had to be amputated. Some soldiers could not even pull the trigger because their hands were too numb. Horses used for transport died in the snow. Supply trucks stalled and were abandoned. The German army, that had moved so quickly during summer, now struggled just to survive. Meanwhile, the Red Army began preparing for something big. Soviet commanders knew the Germans were overextended. They understood that winter was not just a season, it was a weapon. Fresh divisions from Siberia arrived near Moscow. These soldiers were trained for extreme cold conditions. They wore white camouflage suits that blended into the snowy landscape. Their equipment was better suited for winter. They moved on skis. They understood how to fight in freezing temperatures. There is an important detail many people miss. These Siberian divisions were only moved west because Soviet intelligence confirmed that Japan would not attack the Soviet Far East at that time. That information allowed Stalin to shift experienced troops toward Moscow. Without that intelligence, the defense of Moscow might have looked very different. German forces continued trying to push forward. Some units came within sight of Moscow's outskirts. They could see church towers in the distance, but they were exhausted, undersupplied, and freezing. Then on December 5th and 6th, 1941, the Red Army launched a massive counteroffensive. It began with artillery fire cutting through the frozen air. Soviet troops attacked along a wide front around Moscow. German units already weakened by cold and months of fighting were suddenly hit from multiple directions. Ski battalions moved quickly through forests. Tanks adapted for winter rolled forward. The surprise was powerful. German commanders had not expected such a large and organized attack. They believed the Soviet Union was nearly finished. Instead, they found themselves facing fresh, motivated troops in harsh conditions they were not prepared for. For the first time in World War II, major German formations were forced to retreat in large numbers. This was not a planned tactical withdrawal. It was a response to overwhelming pressure. Hitler reacted with anger. He ordered his forces to hold their positions at all costs. No retreat, no step back. He believed that if units stayed firm, the line would stabilize. Some generals disagreed. They understood the danger. But Hitler's orders were clear, and so German soldiers dug into frozen ground that was as hard as stone. Many could not dig deep enough. They built makeshift shelters from snow and wood. Casualties from frostbite sometimes exceeded combat losses. Entire units reported that more men were lost to cold than to Soviet bullets. The myth of the unstoppable German war machine was breaking apart in the snow. This was not just a military setback, it was psychological. For months, Europe had watched Germany win battle after battle. Now the world saw something new. Germany could be stopped. The Red Army was not defeated. It was fighting back with strength. As Soviet forces pushed westward, from Moscow, German lines bent but did not fully collapse. Some units resisted fiercely. Others fell back in disorder. Communication lines were strained. Supplies were limited. Morale was shaken. And while this brutal winter battle unfolded, another event changed the global balance of power. On December 7, 1941, Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. The United States entered the war. Soon after, Germany declared war on America. The conflict was now truly worldwide. But here, in the snow outside Moscow, something even more important had happened. The quick victory Germany expected was gone. The war in the East would not end in 1941. It would become a long, brutal struggle of endurance. The Red Army's counterattack did not destroy the German army completely. But it stopped it. It pushed it back. It shattered the idea that Germany could not be beaten, and this is only the beginning. Because what followed inside the German high command, and how Hitler responded to this setback, would shape the next years of war on the Eastern Front. Decisions made in heated rooms far from the front lines would cost hundreds of thousands of lives. In the next part, we will go deeper into the counteroffensive itself, the tension between Hitler and his generals, and how the winter of 1941 changed the strategy of the entire war. Stay with History Plus. The snow is only getting heavier. As the Red Army pushed forward through the snow, the shock inside German headquarters was growing. For months, reports had been filled with victories. Now they were filled with words like withdrawal, heavy losses, and critical conditions. German commanders on the ground were facing a reality that Berlin did not want to accept. The offensive toward Moscow had failed. The cold was relentless. Temperatures dropped so low that even breathing felt painful. Metal snapped. Fuel froze. Soldiers tried to warm engines with small fires underneath tanks, but sometimes the engines still would not start. Wounded men often froze before medical help could reach them. Entire artillery pieces were abandoned because horses pulling them collapsed in the snow. But the Red Army was not slowing down. Soviet troops attacked in waves, using speed and surprise. Ski units moved through forests, striking supply lines and weak points. Fresh reserves kept arriving. German forces, stretched thin across hundreds of miles, struggled to hold a solid defensive line. Inside the German High Command, arguments began. Some generals, like Heinz Guderian, believed pulling back to shorter defensive positions would save lives and stabilize the front. They knew the army was exhausted and undersupplied, but Hitler refused. He believed retreat meant weakness. He believed standing firm would restore control. So he issued strict no-retreat orders. This decision changed everything. German units that might have reorganized were forced to hold exposed positions. Many soldiers felt trapped. They were fighting not only the Red Army but also the winter itself. Morale dropped sharply. For the first time, German troops began to question whether victory was guaranteed. Meanwhile, Soviet morale was rising. The defense of Moscow became a symbol of survival. Propaganda showed images of soldiers fighting bravely in the snow. Civilians believed the worst had been avoided. The capital still stood. That alone was powerful. By late December 1941, German forces had been pushed back between 60 to 150 miles in some areas. It was not a total collapse, but it was a clear failure of the original plan. The lightning war had turned into a frozen stalemate. The Red Army had proven something important. Germany could be stopped. And once an army loses the image of invincibility, the psychological impact spreads far beyond the battlefield. But the consequences of this winter would not end here. Hitler's decisions during this crisis would reshape German command structure. Generals would be dismissed, control would tighten, and the war in the East would become even more brutal. In Part 3, we will explore how this winter changed Hitler himself, how command conflicts deepened, and how both sides prepared for an even larger and deadlier phase of the war. Stay with History Plus. The storm is far from over. As winter tightened its grip in early 1942, something inside Hitler began to change. The failure outside Moscow was not just a military setback. It was a personal shock. For years, his bold risks had paid off. Poland fell. France collapsed. The Balkans were crushed. Every gamble seemed to prove him right. But now, for the first time, his instinct had failed him. Instead of accepting reality, he reacted by tightening control. Hitler began removing generals who disagreed with him. Experienced commanders who suggested tactical withdrawals were replaced or sidelined. He took more direct command over military operations. From this point forward, many strategic decisions would be made personally by him, often ignoring the advice of professionals on the ground. This shift had long-term consequences. German officers started to fear speaking honestly. Reports became more cautious. Some commanders followed orders even when they knew those orders would cost thousands of lives. The chain of command became rigid. Flexibility, once a strength of the German army, slowly weakened. At the same time, the Soviet leadership was learning hard lessons too. Joseph Stalin had also made serious mistakes earlier in the war. But unlike Hitler in this moment, Stalin began allowing his generals more operational freedom. Commanders like Zhukov gained influence. The Red Army improved coordination, logistics, and defensive strategy. This difference in leadership style would matter a lot in the coming years. The winter of 1941-42 did not destroy the German army. It did not end the war in the East. But it shifted momentum. Germany was no longer advancing toward quick victory. Instead, it was now fighting a long war of survival on a massive front. Factories deep inside the Soviet Union continued producing weapons. American aid under Lend-Lease started arriving. Fresh Soviet divisions kept forming. Time was no longer on Germany's side. For many German soldiers, the illusion of a short essay campaign was gone. They understood now that this war would not end quickly. Letters home changed tone. Confidence turned into endurance. The snow eventually melted. The immediate crisis around Moscow stabilized. But the damage had been done. The myth of unstoppable blitzkrieg had cracked, and once a myth cracks, enemies everywhere begin to see opportunity. In the final part, we'll look at how this winter shaped the future battles of 1942 and why historians still consider December 1941 one of the most decisive turning points of World War II. Stay with History Plus. The final chapter is coming. When the snow finally began to melt in early 1942, the battlefield around Moscow was silent compared to the chaos of December. But that silence hid a massive truth. Germany had lost control of the pace of the war. The winter counteroffensive did not destroy the Wehrmacht. It did not end the fighting, but it shattered the illusion of quick victory. For the first time, Nazi Germany had been pushed back on a large scale. The Red Army had survived, and more importantly, it had struck back. From this moment forward, the war in the East became a long, brutal struggle of attrition. Germany would launch new offensives in 1942, including the drive toward Stalingrad, but the confidence of 1941 would never fully return. The balance had shifted. The myth of invincibility was gone. December 1941 proved something simple but powerful. Weather alone did not stop Germany. Soviet resistance, leadership adjustments, industrial relocation, and strategic mistakes all combined to change the course of the war. The winter exposed weaknesses that could no longer be hidden, and that is why historians still see this moment as one of the most critical turning points of World War II. If you found this breakdown clear and helpful, drop your thoughts in the comments. Do you think Germany could have recovered if different decisions were made? I'd really like to hear your opinion. Share this video with someone who loves military history. And if you haven't already, make sure you're subscribed to History Plus so you don't miss our next deep dive. The snow stopped the offensive, but it also started the downfall. I'll see you in the next one.